Alrighty. Hello and welcome to another video here that I am doing for 3 more book reviews. They are going to be for The Navajo Nightmare, which is a 2-part story, basically 2 novellas by Steve Stred and Dan Sodengren. I am also, of course, reviewing another Bentley Little book, The Revelation. This is actually, I believe, Bentley Little's first book. And the last one I'm going to cover today is Goblin, which is a novel in 6 novellas. So, without further ado, let me get to my intro, and then we'll get right into the books. And we are back. So, let me cover Navajo Nightmare first, because this is a book that I did enjoy, but I had some issues with the second story of this. So, where can I get this? Look it up right here. Alrighty, let me pull this up real quick. Okay. Navajo Nightmare. Let's see. Charles Anderson is a killer, or at least he was once. Now he lives a quiet life with his family until a gang of crooks take everything from him, and Charles must make a diabolical pact, his soul in exchange for vengeance. That's the first story. The second story is Tanner Williams has been tasked with an impossible job to track and kill the bloodthirsty abomination that stalks the plains, haunted by his dark past. Tanner must learn the horrifying secrets of the Navajo Nightmare. From the twisted minds of David Sodengren, The Forgotten Island, and Steve Stred comes a gripping, blood-soaked horror western that will leave you breathless. So if you didn't know, this is western horror. So this is a 2-part story, basically 2 novellas. David Sodengren does the first one, which talks about Charles Anderson, the killer, and then Steve Stred does the Navajo Nightmare. Now they are both connected as stories. The first story is basically your typical vengeance story. You know, this man Charles and his wife. He meets his wife. His wife is a prostitute. He basically saves her from a person who's trying to attack her. He kills that person, and then they try to settle down in this city, in this town, and they have a little place to stay, and they have to have a child, and they're ready to settle down. And of course, they meet some bad guys, 5 bad guys. And then something happens. Charles needs vengeance against these 5 guys, and he makes a pact with the devil, basically. They call the devil Lester in this story. And he just goes to town on these people. I mean, I don't know how to describe. This is a gore fest. Total. I haven't read anything, I think, in a while anyway, that is so heavily gory as this story. This is like, I don't even know how to describe it, but it's just, yeah, it is just amazing, really, how much gore is in this first story, how violent and vicious this first story is. I mean, I just read like 3 slasher novels before this, and they don't even touch the gore of the violence that this gunslinger does to the people around him. He is just a walking, just wrecking machine. So I mean, if you like that kind of story, and I did, I'm gonna tell you, I actually really liked this first story. And if you like that kind of story and the unrelentingness, and there's like kind of a person who you kind of root for him in the beginning because of what's happened to him. But then at the end, you start seeing where it's going, and you're seeing how dark it kind of gets, and it's kind of like, oh boy, now what did I just sign up for? And I like I said again, I just love that first story. I didn't like the second story as much though. Um, the writer of the second story, and again, the second story is connected to the first story. Um, the writer of the second story, it's a lot different story. I mean, there is some violence in there. There is some talk about basically deals with the slavery issue and deals with the racism and the deal with obviously with Navajo, we deal with the Indians and deals with misogyny and deals with basically kind of more of social issues that happen in the West. I mean, it still has some dark moments in it, but it's a lot slower burn. It's definitely nowhere near as vicious as the first book, and I didn't like the ending as much in the second book. Um, but because I really like that first book, and the first book, and this is about, what is this, 200 pages, 180 pages, and each story is literally pretty much split right down the middle. I think when I was reading it on Kindle, I pretty much at 50% is basically when the second book started. So I'm pretty sure that it's pretty evenly paced. And like I said, for only $3, I definitely think it is worth it as a book you should pick up. And that's my review for the Navajo Nightmare. Now I'll talk about Goblin. Goblin is a Josh Malerman book, and I wasn't sure what to think about this book because I know I read Bird Box, which I really liked, and then I read Unbury Carol, which I really didn't like. I don't remember about House at the bottom of the lake. I actually looked at it. I saw it. I don't know if I read it or not though. But I definitely read those two books, and I was kind of a 50-50 with Josh Malerman, so I wasn't sure about this. And this is a novel that's basically 6 novellas that all take place in the town of Goblin. So let me talk about each story here. So basically, it starts off before the story. It says it's this prologue, which talks about this truck driver who picks up something that he's going to take to Goblin. There's all these weird rules about it. And as he's driving along, things happen, and he remembers the rules, and it's like, well, why should I follow this weird rule? But, there's something kind of sinister about what he's carrying to Goblin, and he has to deliver at an exact specific time, and is he going to make it? And that's kind of how, like, the first story goes. It's like, oh, this creepy thing in there, what is it? And all these different rules. Is he going to make it to Goblin in time? Or if he doesn't, what's going to happen? And it's kind of an interesting little prologue, but it's only a couple of pages, and then we actually get into the actual novellas. So the first novella here I'm going to talk about here is a man in slices, I believe it's called. And this story is about Richard and Charles. They're best friends. The whole story about how Richard meets Charles. Charles comes over to see Richard. And quickly you find out Charles is kind of a troublemaker, kind of a little maladjusted kind of child. But Richard stays friends with him all through their childhood. And Charles finally actually winds up meeting a girlfriend. But this girlfriend has some strange request for Richard. And basically what happens is Richard tells a story, for Charles. So strange request for Charles. Charles meets a girlfriend and has some strange request. So Charles comes to Richard and basically says, oh my God, I think I messed up because, I didn't want to lose this girl and she had these weird rules. I mean, this weird kind of fetish thing, I guess, that she wanted for him to prove his love to. But he kind of messed it up, and he doesn't know if Richard can help him. And that's basically the premise of the story. And you'll find out by reading the story what it is. I mean, I think you kind of got a hint there with a man in slices, but it's actually pretty well done. It's probably one of my favorite stories out of these 6. Is this one, just because of the kind of the weirdness of this relationship that him and Richard and Charles had. Next story is Camp. Camp is about this guy who is totally petrified of being scared to death. He basically took all of the walls out of his apartment. So this way he can see completely through all of his entire apartment. He actually has videotapes. He videotapes every single area of his apartment. He can record all of his apartment. He sleeps on a plexiglass bed so he doesn't get scared by looking underneath the bed and seeing somebody hiding underneath the bed. And the reason he's scared of all this, besides being in the town of Goblin, is because his entire family has all seen ghosts. They've all told him their old little ghost stories, and he is so scared that he's next. That if his whole family has seen ghosts, he's obviously going to see a ghost, and he is so petrified that he's going to actually get scared to death of seeing a ghost that he makes sure that he's not going to be able to see a ghost. This is why he doesn't want to get a ghost to actually scare him, so he wants to be prepared. That's why he takes all these videotapes and makes sure he sees everything. He sets his clock to kind of like wake him up every hour or so this way he can go back and look over the videotapes so nothing's trying to creep in slowly and scare him. And it's a really good story. One of the coolest parts actually about the story is there's like kind of like a little mini story in the middle of it where this landlady comes up, and takes him out of his house, takes him out of his room, and they go down and they have a cup of coffee or something like that. They basically sit down and he tells her stories about the past of Goblin, because he's basically like the local historian for Goblin. So you find out these really cool Goblin backstories. That's actually almost as good as the actual story about him being scared to death. You find out these cool little backstories about the 60 in Goblin and about, the beginnings of Goblin. So in that sense, I actually did enjoy that story. Just for that. And the scaring part was interesting too. But really, I actually kind of liked the side story a lot in Camp. And that was the second story. Third story, Happy Birthday Hunter, was a story about this hunter, who a big game hunter, and he has a party, and he sneaks out on this party with a couple of friends because he wants to go out on a hunt. He wants to go on a special hunt. What you find out is there's this endangered, protected animal in the town of Goblin, and there's this actual part of Goblin, which is the North Woods, which comes into play in other parts, in other stories as well. The North Woods that people stay away from because they feel like there's a witch in the North Woods and there's dangers in the North Woods. But he wants to go and hunt this owl. This creature, and actually capture it. And that's basically kind of the story. There is a twist at the end, which is kind of cool, but it's not my favorite of the stories. It's probably my there's one story I really don't like at all in here. This one is probably like the second weakest one, because I didn't like the twist ending. I really wasn't as jazzed about it, but that's my review for Happy Birthday Hunter, that story. The next one is called Presto. So Presto is about this Roman Empire. I think his name is Emperor Roman. I forgot what Emperor Roman Emperor. I think it's called. Who is this magician, and they start off with him doing a show, and it seems so realistic. And the guy who's watching the show is really into it, and you find out that is it real magic or is it fake magic? Is it what they call in this book called dirty magic? As far as it's ever trick magic or is it dirty magic? And the biggest thing about this story is you find out all about the Roman Emperor, how he started to do magic tricks, and why he got met by this woman Maggie, who kind of teaches him his act that he really needs in order to succeed. And you find out what he has to do in order to succeed in this show, and what this story is really about. And the cool thing is, there's actually this kid, because the Roman Empire is going to go. Roman Empire, I keep saying that. Roman Emperor is going to go into Goblin, and there's one young budding magician called Pete, who's so excited to see the Roman Emperor, and he gets all his news clippings, and he goes to the magic shop, and he finds out all this information about him, and he's so interested in him, and tries to, to get money to actually go to the show. And the thing is, what will happen to Pete? What will happen at that show? You just have to read the story to find out. Again, I like the story. Yeah, I like the story. It's one of those kind of stories that kind of has a little bit of an ending that doesn't completely end, but you know where it's going. But sometimes I don't like that in stories, when they don't actually tell you the full ending, they just kind of hint at it. Next one is the fifth story, is the mix-up at the zoo. This is the one I like the least. This one I honestly could skip. I didn't find this at all interesting. There's this kind of a misfit character named Dirk, who has two jobs. He works at a zoo and he works at a slaughterhouse. And he has to quit his job. He decides to quit his job, one of his jobs. And basically all through the book, he's basically trying to get a lady. He wants to try to get, see if he can ever get a lady, ever, build up the nerve to get one. And when he finally quits his job and he finally feels like he can get a lady, he finds a woman. And you find out what happens on that first date that they have. But there's all different weird dreams kind of he has, weird kind of lapses he has. And yeah, I don't want to give away the story too much, but I just found the story just not interesting to me. It just was, like I said, just blah for me. The last story is the story that you actually see here on the cover of Goblin, which is the hedge maze. This story is about this character named Wayne, whose wife dies, and after she dies, he starts building this maze. Just building all these hedges, and he builds this maze. And you find out that basically this maze gets so popular in the town that all these people start going to this maze, and they pay like $8 to try to go through the maze. And he has all these little kind of exits put into the maze, where if you get too tired of trying to figure out the maze, you can just bail out on it. And all this time, no one has ever been able to figure out how to get past this maze, except for this one little girl named Maggie. Of course, Maggie finds something at the end of the maze, and she tells him she's going to go to the cops. Now, it's not what you think. They make you think it's something, and it's not what you think. It's still really good, and it does go into a weird direction. It definitely goes into a weird direction. And I really liked it. I like I said, this one, that last story, I really did like. And then at the end, they kind of go back to the trucker, and he, we see him getting into the town of Goblin, and we see what happens to him and his cargo. And again, that was a cute little story as well. So in the end, there was one story I really didn't like, one story I thought was and most of them I liked. So in my expert opinion, as an expert reviewer, in my opinion, I really liked Goblin. I honestly thought it was a very interesting story, and I would recommend it as a book to read. Last one I'm going to cover here is The Revelation. Now, The Revelation is a Bentley Little book. Like I've told you before, I'm going to be reading some Bentley Littles, so get ready to see Bentley Littles in a lot of my horror book reviews. This is the first Bentley Little book, I believe. So let me read this little synopsis here. Okay. Oops. Sorry. For the town of Randall, Arizona, the terror starts quietly. Oddly, a senile woman in her 80s becomes pregnant. Then the town's beloved minister mysteriously disappears, leaving the church and home hideously defiled by blasphemous obscenities scrawled in blood. Farmers going out to their fields in the morning find a herd of goats slaughtered. Then, as the terror intensifies, the farmers themselves are massacred. The town begins to smell of death, and the trust which has bound neighbors to one another turns to ashes. But the relentless tide of death is only an augury of a far more unspeakable cataclysm. A stranger arrives, an itinerant preacher with mad eyes and an elemental presence named Brother Elias. He seeks out 3 men: the sheriff, tough, no-nonsense Jim Weldon; the new minister, a gentle, God-fearing soul named Father Andrews; and Gordon Lewis, a young newlywed whose pregnant wife, Marina, is the unknown center of the coming fury. Together, these people must face an implacable force of evil, as old as the world and as relentless as the desert sun. So, like typical Bentley Little, here's a presence, an evil presence. Gets worse and worse, and then people have to band together to save the day. That's basically how the story goes. And again, it does work. This Brother Alliance basically has kind of like premonitions. He tells people, oh, this is going to happen, this is going to happen. And that's how more people start getting on his side, because some of the premonitions he says happen, come true. I like kind of Bentley Little's kind of take on good and evil in this book. It's actually pretty good. But there is one thing I have to mention, because to me, this is something that is not mentioned here, but you have to be prepared for. I guess a trigger warning, I guess, for people who a trigger warning for abortion or miscarriage. If you have issues with that, you might have trouble with this book, because there are, how can I describe it? There are demon babies in this book. That's all I'm going to say. That's the only thing I'm going to use, is demon babies. And you need to read this book because of the demon babies. You're never going to look at anything more terrifying than these demon babies. I just, I don't want to spoil it too much. You just have to read the book because of that. It's just, is it one of Bentley Little's best? I don't know, but it is definitely a fun one. I did like to see him, take on kind of the preacher, end of the world type of thing. Basically, is what he's doing here. And I thought it was a good book. And I could even, obviously this is the first one he's ever written, so it's an older book. But hold on, it's an older book, but it's a good book. And on that note, I'm going to leave you now. So, thanks again for watching, and I hope to see you soon. Bye.